Cool. All right, so today, again, we're trying something a little bit different, broadcasting differently, so I hope everyone can tune in. Look forward to having you all, and then it'll be a little bit better picture so I don't look quite as fuzzy. So today, as I was reflecting on what we were going to reflect on, I remembered some conversations that we'd had starting at World Religion Day. So at World Religion Day, all the different religions in the area or churches came together to basically put on a little display of what they're about, have some interfaith conversations, and I think to me the point was to just have a better understanding of each other and how there are a lot of similarities is kind of the point that I took from it. And in having the conversations with all of the different faiths, I realized that most of what we're after is the same. And I've said it before in services, but I really see it as 90 to 95% of what a religion is after, at least in this life, is the same. We want good things for ourselves, for our families, for our children, for our communities, for our future. And that drives us to make decisions that are primarily aligned, right? We tend to be nice to each other, treat each other as we want to be treated. You know, we tend not to lie, steal, cheat, murder, because that upholds the fabric of society. And so, as I was having these conversations, people were coming up and asking questions about what does it mean to be humanist. And I would explain to them, well, this is what generally we think in our church or our group in particular. And it seemed as though for most of them there was no conflict. They're like, okay, that makes sense. And so that got me to thinking about, well, what if we're all just saying the same thing, but we're speaking a different language? So when we talked a few weeks ago about reality, the nature of reality, that service came out of a conversation in particular that I had with one of the members there representing a different church. Now, he was after an absolute truth or an immutable truth, and during that conversation I had thought, well, I don't really know that the idea of an object, reality, or truth is useful. But I did realize that we're all looking at reality, what we think is reality, through our own perception, right? We see it through our lens as an individual. And whether it's the idea of reality or God or spirituality, we all have to see it through our set of glasses that are attached to our head. So I wondered, what if the way that we're interpreting all of those things is actually, we're looking at the same object, but we're seeing it from a different perspective, right? There's the story about the elephant. I think, Ken, you and I had talked about this, right? So what's sort of story? It's basically blind men observing and communicating about an elephant. And each one has a different piece of the elephant. So one's talking about the trunk, one's talking about the leg, one's talking about the side, and they're all describing something wildly different, but they're observing and perceiving the same object, so the same objective reality. And then a group of us went to a play called Inherit the Wind, which is about the Scopes monkey trial from 1925, and it's based on a play from 1955. And there were some lines in the play that reminded me about this idea that while we might have different ideas about what is right or what is good or what is useful, we should still have an understanding of what other people are saying, because they might be looking at it from a perspective different from our own, and that might provide us some value, even if it's just to understand them as a person. So again, what if we're all saying the same thing but speaking different languages? So I know a little bit of German, and I know that there are words in German that do not translate well to English. Now, we can kind of triangulate the meaning a little bit by using a bunch of other words to figure out exactly what it means, but the meanings are just slightly different, right? And so we try and communicate, and we often miss the mark, and that's true even if we're speaking the same language, right? We say words because we know what our intent is in our head, but words are an imprecise form of communication, right? We're always leaving something out. It's not the full picture that's in our mind. So if we're talking about these ideas, and a lot of times when we're talking about religion or spirituality or God or topics along those lines, these are our fervently and closely held personal beliefs. And when we talk about them, we get impassioned. And a lot of times when people don't understand, we get defensive, right? And really, these ideas are fundamentally about our existence and our place in the universe, right? Whether or not you believe in God or believe in a specific religion, right? The reason we get defensive is because it has to do with our identity, right? I see myself as part of this idea which orients me in my existence, right? It tells me where I am and who I am and how I behave. And to question all of those things makes my life a lot more complicated, because then I have to question each step along the way. And really, that's what religion, church, and philosophy is all about, right? It's about answering the big questions. So when we're having these conversations, it's important for us to understand that we might be not communicating as clearly as we would wish, or we might not be communicating in a language that someone else understands. And so I want to start off today's service with the quote I ended the last service with, and it's a quote by Pascal, and it's, "By space the universe encompasses and swallows me up like an atom, and by thought I comprehend the world." So when we go back to this idea of religion orienting our existence, it is difficult to consider ourselves as an individual in the vast expanse of the universe. But when we start to communicate and we're able to think about and orient ourselves, we can comprehend the whole, or at least as much of it as we can make useful to ourselves. So in that light, what is God? Again, in having these conversations at World Religion Day, people would give different definitions. And sometimes it's the man in the sky with a white beard and a robe, right? The image of God portrayed in media, in literature, right? Is that what it is? Is it the pantheon of gods from Greek and Roman times, or from Norse and Viking and even Indian mythology? Is it karma, right? Is it the life force, the energy that is in all of us and in the world? Is it spirits of nature, right? The earth spirits and the tree spirits and the water spirits? Is it the concept of the supernatural deity? Or is it simply a placeholder for the unexplained? Right? Throughout history, we have used religion to explain things we don't understand. So when people talk about God, right, a lot of times they're talking about a specific construct that's been built over time. But when you go back to why that construct was built in the first place, a lot of times it was to fill a void. And so if you go back to those root assumptions, maybe that's what they're saying when they mean God. Beyond that, what if the concept of God is a description for a sense of wonder or amazement, and particularly those feelings that we feel about our fragility and our perceived insignificance in the universe, right? Going back to that quote, "By space, we are the tiniest speck." And so is the idea of God simply something that helps us to orient ourselves, helps us to be part of the greater whole? And then what if, in an attempt to name that representation of all human connection and meaning, we come up with the idea of God? So putting it in sort of humanist terms, what if the idea of God, or something that is simply transcendent, that transcends the individual human, is just the idea of all of human history and achievement and human connection put together? Because if you think about it like that, if we let go of the dogma and the constructs and the history, look at the accomplishments of humans throughout history. Look at the level of complexity that we've achieved, even as organisms, but let alone what we've done with society. It is difficult to comprehend. It is amazing. It brings wonder. And it also makes us feel individually insignificant, right? Because we are the tiniest speck even in human history. So what if that's what people are saying when they're saying God? I mean, is not the story of human history miraculous, in a sense, quote unquote miraculous, right? Months ago we had talked about how we got here, right? And a lot of people say, well, basically you have the watchmaker theory, right? You wouldn't find a watch on the ground and say, oh, this came about naturally, right? That's the argument. Of course, when you look at the infinite possibilities of infinite chances of the universe developing in the ways that it could, there is actually some fairly logical steps to describe how we came to be, right? It is incredibly complex how the universe formed, how elements become heavier through physical forces, and how just the right circumstances came about. But we don't know what came before the Big Bang. It could have happened, infinite times. So chances are, in infinity, the existence we're in could possibly happen. So if you look at that as your definition of miraculous as highly unlikely, then sure. And so what if this idea of God is simply our way to comprehend those circumstances? Now, as a humanist, I don't definitively say that God does or does not exist. As mentioned, in previous services, one, I don't think that's useful. And two, I don't think it's possible to prove. You can't logically prove the non-existence of something. Now, as we talked about last week, if I had to make a wager for humanity, I wager on a non-interfering deity, if there is one, right? I find that unlikely and unhelpful for this existence because we only know about this life. So I don't offer those things up to kind of sell the idea of divinity. I offer it as the exact opposite, those ideas. So when we hear about divinity and miracles and the supernatural, maybe people are trying to describe something they don't have the words to convey. So that doesn't discount their amazement, their wonder at the whatever it was. I mean, science is pretty amazing. The universe is pretty amazing. Human achievement is pretty amazing. And I don't think we should say that those things are less because they are not divine or supernatural. I think they are amazing in and of themselves. And so, again, going back to the idea of we're working toward the same goals. So I think it's important not to denigrate or put down someone because they have an understanding of something that is based in a supernatural, right? Just because it might not work for me doesn't mean that it's not a useful construct to them, right? And that's their perception from where they're oriented at the time, right? That's where they stand, so that's what they see. They see a different part of the elephant, if you will. And I would say that few of us in this room started off as people who may not find the supernatural idea useful. I know I didn't. I started off Catholic. I know we have people in the room who are former Mormon, right? Most of us came from a religion, and it took us oftentimes many years to transition to having a different concept that we found more useful in orienting us in the world. So I would say it's really important for us to give people a little bit of space and grace to grow. Now, we can have conversations with them, but we should converse to understand, not converse to change minds, right? Anyone who's engaged in a conversation on Facebook recently knows that you don't do that, right? It doesn't work. What you can do is converse to understand, share your perspective, share your part of the elephant, and that might help them come up with a better construct that helps them see more of that elephant. So going back to the idea of wonder, what about wonder? Right? Wonder and amazement, these are these overwhelming emotions that some might call transcendent. Right? They're things that evoke emotions so powerful in you that you feel that there must be something more to it. Or they make us feel as if maybe we're part of something bigger. I know to me, that feeling isn't necessarily, for me it's not divine or supernatural, but I see it as kind of two things. One, that feeling is almost overwhelming because maybe we have a limited understanding or comprehension of a big concept. And then two, it's an intense feeling of connection to something. So some examples, right? When people see amazing landscapes, the Grand Canyon, for example, thinking of the forces that carved out the canyon over thousands of years is amazing. Right? It's hard to comprehend the time scale over which that happened. Studying complex biological systems, right? When you look at the intricacy and how cell defense works and the immune system and all the systems integrate together, it seems, quote unquote, miraculous, right? All of these systems work in harmony to keep us alive for a period of time. I know for me personally, listening to certain kinds of music, so an example for me specifically is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The complexities and the power of that music, it's as if Beethoven basically composed emotion and was communicating it through music. So I get very emotional when I listen to it, particularly the second movement and the fourth movement. And it's difficult to comprehend the entirety of the symphony and the complexity of it. And when you think about the science, the harmonics and the frequencies, the wavelengths, and it all means something, right? He wrote it for a particular purpose, right? It communicates a story, so there are so many levels of complexity in it. It becomes difficult to comprehend, and the only way you can express yourself is through emotion. So to me, again, that's not to say that just because something isn't divine or supernatural doesn't mean it's not transcendent. I think it's important for us to realize that there are things that are transcendent, and our emotions in experiencing those things are important to hold in front of us. To realize that there's great joy to be experienced from the complexity of our lives. So going on from that idea of what is wonder, or how should we think about wonder, or how could we, is what about our impact? Right, so I know in traditional religions, a lot of times what we do in this life is to get us to the next one, right? Get us to the infinite win, right? The afterlife. But just because there's no supernatural doesn't mean that our collective actions aren't transcendent, that they don't transcend our individual life. It's not as if we exist in individual vacuums, we live, we die, and it doesn't matter. I would argue the opposite is true. And as we talked about last week when we were talking about death, it is not just about our lives. It's about the impact we have on others. Again, if it were true that we existed in a vacuum and our lives meant nothing individually, then we would never have built the complex society that we have. We would never have achieved so much. It's only been through the adding to complexity that has happened in every individual's lifetime that has built us to where we are. You hear people giving speeches say we stand on the shoulders of giants, but it's really true. Actually, I would revise that to say we don't stand on the shoulders of giants, we stand on the shoulders of hundreds of thousands of millions of people who have built us up to where we are over time. So they were all regular-sized people, but added together, it seems as though we stand on the shoulders of giants. So if we look at this from a physics phenomenon, this is really just energy transmission, right? I've got a little bit of energy and I share it with other people, and maybe it brings them value. It allows them to live a more complex life, to better understand the picture of the elephant. And then they take that and they transmit their energy to the next person so that they might see a little bit more clearly and understand a little bit better those things that we see today as transcendent. And contributing to our society allows us to live on. Not in the supernatural sense, not in karma, not in reincarnation maybe, but in the sense that we give ourselves to others. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It simply changes. And the idea of entropy and extropy, right, is that entropy is always trying to make things less complex. But humans, we really fight against that. We try and make things more complex. And I don't mean complex in terms of complicated or difficult, but complex in terms of that idea of being transcendent or wonderful. So that humanist perspective then, if you look at it this way, if it's a useful construct for you, means that you have the ability to give meaning to what is wonderful. And that your actions contribute to that sense of wonder and that sense of complexity. So again, if we're talking about God and we're talking about divinity, that might be someone else's way to understand the extreme complexities of the universe, of human interaction, of the butterfly effect, of all of these ideas that are difficult to contain in one mind. But I think the humanist idea and the humanist construct of existing in the world and perceiving your existence helps you to hold a little bit more of that in your mind, understand it a bit more, and bask in that wonder without needing the supernatural or the divine. So with that, I want to translate some things from traditionally religious into humanist. I remember when I was a bit younger, and more, I would say not strongly, maybe that's not the right word, but irritatingly atheist, right? So I'm still atheist in my worldview. I do not operate as if there is a God directing or observing my actions. But when I was more confrontational about it, I would challenge people when they would say things like, God bless you, or have a blessed day. But then I realized as I got older, they're just trying to be nice, right? So when I experience someone, and they've been brought up in the culture of be nice to people, and they do that by saying, have a blessed day, that's what they're saying is have a good day. I once had a conversation with a former teacher, and we were talking about my non-belief in the supernatural, and somebody sneezed, and I said, bless you, right? Because I've been brought up Catholic. It's just what you said. It's culturally what we do. And she challenged me on it, and I said, you know what, you're right. So I started saying Gesundheit. So Gesundheit in German means healthiness, right? It's kind of how it would translate. So gesund is health, and Heit is usually like a state of being. So Gesundheit is be healthy or have healthiness, right? But they mean the same thing, right? You're not like instructing them, you will be healthy now, right? Nor maybe are you actually giving them a supernatural blessing. What you're doing is wishing them good health, right? It's like saying thank you or you're welcome. It doesn't do us much functional good in the moment other than having a polite society. Again, have a blessed day. It's like saying have a nice day, or I hope you have a great day. And I think that's important to realize, because while we might be conditioned, especially if we've come from a background where our religious experiences were not great, or they were hostile, it might inspire in us a bit of hostility, but I think it's important for us to realize that that's their perspective. So they're wishing us well through their lens. When people say, I'll pray for you, right? Kind of the same thing. Now, I do have to challenge a little bit on the thoughts and prayers, right? Thoughts and prayers are nice. It's a nice sentiment. But I think thoughts and prayers, the concept, right? The concept that I am asking a supernatural power to basically engage on my behalf for you is not as powerful a construct as doing something. And of course, there are plenty of examples in the Bible where Jesus says, go out and take care of the poor and the sick, the hungry, right? So I think it's important to not always give people 100% of benefit of the doubt. Sometimes people need challenge to do good in the world. So I would challenge that one a little bit. It's nice, it's a nice sentiment, but let's do something about what ails our world. And again, this is not to say that there is or is not supernatural power. I can't prove that, nor do I think it's particularly useful to argue about. If that's what your thing is and you want to argue, metaphysics and things that may exist outside of human understanding, then you have at it. Maybe you'll advance some piece of the way we understand supernatural. That's totally fine. But I think in day-to-day circumstances, that's not a very useful construct or conversation for most of us. So what are the takeaways from today? 1, give people the benefit of the doubt. Again, they may need the time to better understand a construct that is more useful to them, just like we had. We all had time to do that. And then, in having conversations about what their beliefs are, ask what their ends look like. Are we working toward the same ends? And if so, see number 1, which is give them the benefit of the doubt. Right? We don't have to convert anybody today. But if we show that we're all working toward the same ends, and they see that maybe our construct works better for us than theirs does for them, they might find value in it. 3, translate from religious to humanist, right? Infer good intent as much as possible. Be like, I think I know what you're saying, but I'm going to assume that you're wishing me well in whatever sense. 4, appreciate complexity through wonder, but also through comprehension. It's okay to both try and understand something and experience wonder. And then 5 is to make an impact. Don't just think good thoughts, but do good deeds. Because as humanists, this is the only life that we know exists. So this is all we have. And that's how we're going to transmit our energy and make the world a better place. So thank you for joining us today. For those who are viewing at home or viewing this later, as always, think of something that you are grateful for in the past week and something that you're looking forward to in the week to come. I know we have movie night coming up, and that's going to be a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to that. So with that said, have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.